All right, here we go with lesson 7 on scatter plots and trend lines. The important vocabulary here is, first of all, we got to understand what a scatter plot is. So, it is a graph with points plotted to show a possible relationship between two sets of data. A scatter plot is an effective way to display some types of data. Also, we want to know what a correlation is. It is something that describes a relationship between two data sets. A graph may show the correlation between data. So a lot of times we're going to want to be graphing these data sets. And the correlation can help to analyze trends and to make predictions. So we can graph all these different data points all over the place, and then we can kind of see what is happening, what might happen in the future, if things continue to go in the direction that the data is suggesting it goes. We have three different types of correlations that we're going to be looking at. We have a positive correlation, and that's this bottom left type of correlation here. And the neat thing about these correlations is that they relate directly to slope. So if you think about it, a positive correlation is going to have, the data is going to have what would appear to have a positive slope. In other words, going from left to right, this should be going in an upward motion. And this data certainly is going in an upward motion from left to right. So that's my positive correlation. The negative correlation means as I read it from left to right, it's going to go down. So again, just like slope, a negative slope would go from left to right down. This is going from left to right down. That is called a negative correlation. And then we have this big mess over here where there's just kind of dots scattered everywhere, and it's really hard to tell if the data is going up, going down, or where these data points are coming from. And what we end up calling, or this suggests that there is no correlation at all going on to this data. Some things that would have no correlation would be if we tried to talk about, let's see, something like what you had for dinner last night and what you got on your most recent math test. Those two things most likely have nothing to do with each other, so if you graphed them, they probably would have no sort of correlation. Okay, so when two sets of data do not have any kind of representation, any kind of way that they're going to connect in a manner that makes any kind of sense, that's when we're going to have no correlation. Trend lines. So what we see here is kind of what I just did with the the positive and negative correlations and how I drew lines on there. What we'll see here is that we can graph a line on a scatter plot to help show a relationship in the data. The line that we graph is called a trend line. It can show the correlation between data sets more clearly and help in making predictions based upon that data. So let's take a look at this one here on the right hand side, top right. The hours of video games played in says in a week. It's hard to see that. And then it has the grade point average. So let's see what kind of correlation is going on here. It looks to me like this is a negative correlation because this data is going from left to right. It tends to be going down. So negative correlation. Okay, and is there a trend line that we could put on here? Let's see. I think we probably could. Looks like the trend line would be going something like this through the data. Notice this, I'm keeping it as straight as I can. I'm doing it freehand. One of the important things about a trend line is that you want to try and split the data in half. So about the same amount of spots above the line as you have below the line. So let's say I have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 above or below, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 6 above. So I'm pretty close. So that's a pretty good estimate for a trend line. Some other things to notice about this trend line is that it doesn't necessarily have to go through any points. It happens to be touching a couple, but the line itself does not need to go through any particular point that the data is suggesting. It just simply needs to be a good representation, a close representation of the trend in which this data is moving. Okay, the relationship between the data, that's what it's showing. So let's take a look at this bottom one. It says hours spent spent studying in a week, and the grade point average again. And here again, it looks like we have a positive correlation, or I shouldn't say again, but here now it looks like we have a positive correlation. As the data goes from left to right, it's going up. So it looks like there's a positive slope or a positive correlation in this data. And if I was to draw a trend line, it looks like I would start down here in the bottom corner or so, and I'd be kind of trying to keep it as straight as possible, going up like that. And again, the goal here was to try and get about as many above and below the line. So it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 or so, maybe 11. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10. So I'm pretty close. I got about 11 above the line, about 10 below the line. So that's splitting this pretty evenly. What you don't want to see is a trend line, say that looks like, I'll do it in a different color here. Let's do it in orange. We do not want to see a trend line that would maybe go like this. Because as you can see at this point, now I only have about 1, 2, 3, 4 dots above, and I would have all the rest of these below. So that's not giving a fair assessment of what is trending here. Okay, I have too much data going on below the line and not enough happening above the line. So that's not giving a fair assessment here. So that would be a bad example of trying to put a trend line in. So again, it's not a perfect science per se, but what it is, it certainly is, though. Let me fix that. There is a level of accuracy that's important. Soon enough, we will be able to determine these lines. We'll use our calculator to find the equations of these lines. But that's for a different day. So I guess I'll leave you with a thought here. Is there a correlation between playing video games and your grades? Looking at the top graph, and how about between studying and grades? So those of you who are planning on turning this video off and then jumping right over to a video game, maybe you might want to think about grabbing a book based on this data. So it's time for Check Your Understanding. I'd like you to please identify the correlation you'd expect to see between each pair of data sets, positive, negative, or none, and explain why. In other words, so let's look at number 1. It says the number of empty seats in a classroom and the number of students seated in the class. So is there a correlation here? If there is a correlation, would you think it is a positive or a negative correlation? So take some time, try to figure this stuff out. Do 1, 2, and 3. Give a little, a sentence or two as to why you think this would be a positive. In other words, justify your answer. Don't just say positive, negative, or none. Explain why you chose those things. All right, great. I will see you next class.